You clicked on this video because you think you know the Prince Harry story. But I can promise you, what he just admitted on stage in Melbourne changes everything we thought we understood about the last 6 years. This isn't the polished PR clip or a carefully worded statement from a spokesperson. This is raw, and frankly, it's a little jarring. We have obtained the audio and the specific wording of his latest keynote speech, and there is one line about the moment he wanted to walk away from it all, and it has nothing to do with what you think. If you leave this video before the halfway point, you're gonna walk away with the exact wrong headline that the tabloids want you to believe. Stick with me for the full context, because the full story is actually a lot more human than the clips suggest. Imagine being 12 years old, standing in front of the entire planet in a suit that doesn't quite fit right, watching the world mourn someone you just called mum. Most of us, when we lose a parent that young, we get to grieve in private, maybe in the back of a classroom or in a counselor's office with a box of tissues. We don't have to walk behind a coffin while camera shutters click like a swarm of mechanical insects. And we certainly don't have to put on a brave face and shake hands with 1,000 strangers who all think they knew her better because they saw her on the cover of a magazine. Now, fast forward nearly 30 decades, and Prince Harry, a man who has spent more time in the headlines than I have watching actual television, just sat down in Melbourne, Australia and dropped a confession that I think we all need to actually sit with for a second before we scroll past it. According to reports coming out of the Intergenerational Summit on Thursday, the Duke of Sussex didn't just give a keynote about leadership or mental health. He gave the audience a piece of very uncomfortable, very real truth about what it felt like to be trapped inside that goldfish bowl. And look, I know what you're thinking. Here we go again, another royal complaining about the job. That's the easy, cynical take, right? But the specific wording he used, the detail about what he wanted to do immediately after the loss of Diana, Princess of Wales, that's the part that made my ears perk up because it directly contradicts the narrative we've been sold for years about duty and the crown. He said it plainly, and sources at the event claimed room went absolutely silent. After my mom died, just before my 13th birthday, I was like, I don't want this job. Now, pause right there. I want you to really absorb that because it's a logistical and emotional nightmare to consider. He's not saying he didn't want the attention or the media scrutiny, though I'm sure that was part of it. He's saying he didn't want the job, the literal, institutional, inherited role that you can't exactly put in a 2-week notice for. And here's the kicker, the part that I think gets lost in the 15-second TikTok clips. He followed it up by saying he stuck his head in the sand for years and years because the very institution he was a part of, the one that makes you shake hands and smile, was in his own view what contributed to the destruction of his mother. He said, and I'm quoting the reports here, "It destroyed my mom, and I was very much against it." That's a pretty massive psychological weight to carry while also having to salute your grandmother and stand on a balcony. Now, if you're watching this and thinking, well, he left, so he got what he wanted, you're missing the most fascinating layer of this entire Australia tour. This isn't just a couple visiting the land under. This is a carefully choreographed move that, according to several royal correspondents and the British press, is being viewed as a strategic attempt to bolster a brand that exists entirely separate from the palace. Some are calling it a backdoor victory, because the late Queen, let's be honest, was pretty firm about what working royal meant. And this trip, this speech, it's walking that razor-thin line between celebrity philanthropy and de facto diplomatic visit. He's in a room where tickets cost over £500, and yet he's talking about feeling powerless. That's the contrast that keeps people watching, and frankly, it's the contrast that drives the clickbait you see everywhere else. But here's where I have to give the guy a sliver of credit, and I promise I'm not going to get sappy on you here. The man has figured out how to articulate the messiness of it all without the stiff upper lip. He told the attendees with what I can only imagine was that sort of half smile he does, that he wasn't sure if he was expected to speak as someone who has his stuff together or someone who, despite what it looks like, actually doesn't. That's a rare moment of self-awareness in an industry built on curated perfection. And while some body language experts are already out there dissecting whether Meghan's posture in the audience was supportive or demoted to a support role, give me a break, by the way. The woman is just sitting in a chair listening to her husband talk about his dead mother. Maybe we let that one slide. The real story underneath the surface is this. Harry is trying to detach the human being from the institution in real time, in public, and he's charging a premium for people to watch him do it. And this brings us to the part of the story that I think is going to cause the biggest stir over the next 48 hours in the UK tabloids. He didn't just talk about the past. He didn't just talk about Diana. He made a direct, and I would argue, rather pointed reference to his own role as a father. He spoke about the need to not let the cycle continue. And while the official reporting is sticking to the be a better parent angle, the subtext is so loud it might as well have its own microphone. He mentioned that without purpose, the grief and the surveillance can break you. It's the implication that he's fighting to not be broken for his own kids, a fight he seems to suggest wasn't fought hard enough for him. That's not gossip. That's a man standing on a stage in Melbourne essentially saying the quiet part out loud about intergenerational trauma in a family that owns castles. Now, let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture of this tour, because context is everything. There are reports swirling that the reception hasn't been entirely warm, with some Aussie papers allegedly slapping them with headlines that are less "welcome to the outback" and more "we've seen this show before." And look, I get it. The world is a little fatigued by the soap opera of it all. But when you strip away the commentary about whether Meghan repeated a royal gesture or whether the whole thing is a sinister plot to upset the palace, and yes, some outlets are genuinely using that kind of language, you're left with a very simple, very human moment. A guy in his early 40s is still trying to process the fact that when he was a preteen, he wanted to quit a job he didn't apply for, but he was too young and too watched to actually do it. And now he's using a business leadership summit to process it. Is it a bit ironic that a man who craves privacy is spilling his emotional guts on a stage with platinum-level ticket pricing? Absolutely, and that's where my own little bit of sarcasm has to creep in. It's the most 2026 thing ever, paying a premium to watch a royal talk about the pain of being watched. But if we're being honest and if we're trying to be fair in our analysis, the alternative, him pretending everything was fine and carrying on like nothing happened, is exactly what he says broke him in the first place. The video ends here, but the conversation is just starting. The real question isn't whether this speech was good or bad for the Sussex brand. The real question is whether hearing a man admit he was a lost, powerless 12-year-old boy changes how you view the actions of the man in his 40s. Let me know in the comments, but keep it civil, folks. We're all just trying to figure out our own stuff here. And thankfully, most of us don't have to do it with the Australian media analyzing every blink.